This book was originally written in 1948. Harlequin reprinted it in 1950 and 2009. That's a long time to wait for a second printing.
Argo Funk Book Review. Argo Funk Book Review.
Tim Briscoe is a low-level actor in New York. His agent Nellie orders him to see her about a job. When he arrives at her office, she's been murdered. Stabbed through the chest with her own filing needle, and now I will never ever use a filing needle for getting rid of old mail. Tim takes the victim's appointment book, which is underneath her arm. It shows Nellie was scheduled to meet 3 people this morning: Bobby LeBee, Shay Ernest, and Maggie Lanson. Maggie is Tim's love interest. She's the only person who really understands him. They're constantly shooting sarcastic one-liners at each other, and sometimes you can't tell if she's being serious or not. She spends most of the book trying to convince Tim that there is no murder mystery and he should stop playing detective. That made me so suspicious Maggie is the culprit, it got in the way of the romance. We get a weird introduction to Maggie. When Tim goes to her apartment, he discovers she accidentally destroyed the glass doorknob in her bathroom. She's been trapped in the bathroom for hours with glass in her butt. Also, she's kind of hungover, which explains a lot. Tim helps clean her up, and they go out for food. They meet a big-time producer named Henry Frobisher, who hires them for his latest play. They also meet Tim's arch-rival, Ted Kent. Ted always makes a big deal of kissing Maggie hello, which angers Tim to no end. Ted's girlfriend Margot must not like it either, because she responds by giving Tim the busiest kiss he's ever had. These actors love drama. Tim does minor investigating. A nearby autograph hound proves Bobby LeBee visited the victim this morning, but all she remembers is that he wears Harlequin glasses. Tim goes to an actors guild which doesn't have Bobby LeBee on file, and he meets with the woman who discovered the body, which is a dead end. Both she and the police are convinced the death was an accident, not murder. Shay Ernest is a dress fitter that confirms the victim regularly purchased expensive dresses. Allegedly, the dresses were for her niece, but Tim sees the niece at the funeral, and she wouldn't fit in them at all. The dresses become a drop subplot after this. We never learn who got them or why. So much for that suspect. The funeral is a mess. Pretty much everyone is drunk, and that's saying something because the characters in this book drink like fish. Kendall Thayer, Tim's neighbor, gives a eulogy that's mostly about himself. That night, Kendall is the next victim. The culprit pours Lysol into his eyes to blind him. Kendall dies in the hospital, and since he was drunk at the time, the police write off this murder as an accident. Maggie and Tim have a brief romantic scene. She doesn't react when he tries to kiss her and play with her hair. She talks about the future and settling down because they've been acting for 10 years. They'll probably never hit the big time at this point. Needless to say, Tim doesn't like this kind of talk at all, and he'd rather go back to kissing. After Kendall dies, Maggie changes her tune and agrees to be Tim's detective partner. She's terrified that Tim was the culprit's intended target, and she tries to convince him to escape with her to Mexico. A brief search reveals the culprit stole the victim's appointment book from Tim's pocket, as well as some of Kendall's old play reviews. They look up the play in the library, and Bobby LeBee was one of the chorus boys in the play. Aha! Tim starts to write down the list of actors, but Maggie says that'll take too long. She rips the page out of the library book. Maggie? Ripping pages out of library books? Now I'm more convinced than ever she's the culprit. The only actor who's still in business is Peter Peters. Tim talks to him, which kicks off a fairly long death sequence. Peter drugs Tim, and a hired thug starts beating him to death. He's saved by random passers-by, goes to a Turkish bath where the culprit tries to kill him, and then tries to kill him again, but he's saved by the fluke arrival of passers-by. Maggie reveals she tore the incriminating page out of the victim's notebook. That's why the culprit is attacking Tim so desperately. The culprit wants that page back. They set a trap for the culprit by loudly mentioning the page at rehearsal. The culprit sees through the trick and easily captures Maggie and Tim. The culprit is Before I get to the culprit reveal, I must warn everyone that this book has outdated gender stereotypes, which reflect the opinions and prejudices of the original author. There's also mild racism, as the culprit's Harlequin glasses are equated with a particular ethnicity. The culprit is Bobby LeBee, who is secretly Ted's girlfriend, Margot. Margot is trans, and she only assumes her birth personality of Bobby when committing crimes. Margot killed both victims for knowing her criminal alter ego. Frobisher is Margot's father, although he pretends his son died in the war rather than admit the truth. The first victim was blackmailing Frobisher over Margot, and Frobisher saves our heroes at the last second. Maggie is so freaked out by the near-death experience, she decides to leave for Mexico for good. Tim wants to kiss her goodbye, but he knows he'll never be able to let her go if he does so. There's a happy ending when Tim learns he made the front page of the New York Times. It's the publicity he needs to launch his career. He proposes to Maggie, who confesses she never really intended to leave without him. The end. Post-book follow-up. This book appears to have 3 titles. There's Terror in Times Square, Kiss Your Elbow, and Murder in Grease Paint. None of them fit the book well. Kiss Your Elbow is an offhand comment by Maggie in the last chapter, referencing a childhood myth that you can change genders by kissing your elbow. I liked this book until the final third. The death sequence went on for far too long, and the culprit reveal was pretty awful. It still leaves out a lot of details, like the dress subplot. The biggest plot hole is how the culprit knows Tim has the victim's appointment book. The culprit spends most of this book trying to get the incriminating evidence back. If the culprit knew about the evidence from the start, why was it left at the crime scene? The narration and dialogue is pretty snappy, and it's also pretty dated. There are plenty of references to 1940s plays and places, to the point where the reprint could use an appendix or footnotes, just telling readers what these things are. I saw one reviewer complain the reprint is censored. If that's true, wow. If the censored version is that offensive, how bad is the uncensored version? I don't know why they chose to reprint this Harlequin book. There are dozens of books that Harlequin published in 1950. Surely one of them is more deserving of a reprint. I've only read 9 of the Harlequin books, and I can think of at least 3 that deserve a reprint more than this one. The general consensus among reviewers is that this book gets 3 stars out of 5, because its good parts balance out its bad parts. I'm rating it a touch lower than that. I give Harlequin number 27, Kiss Your Elbow, a 5 out of 10.